one of my favorite stories. Be'emet. I tell it all the time. You've heard it a half a dozen times probably. There is a Hasidic group called Ger or Gur. Gerer Hasidim. They're big in America, but they're very, very big in Israel. There's tens of thousands of Gerer Hasidim in Israel. Before the Holocaust, there probably were hundreds of thousands of Gerer Hasidim. It's probably not an exaggeration. Ger is a village, a pretty big village, but a village nevertheless, not far from Warsaw, Varsha. And on a Yom Tif, thousands of Hasidim would come to the Gerer Rebbe. Thousands. Could be even tens of thousands. How they were accommodated is a mystery to me. But Hasidim came to the Gerer Rebbe not in the hundreds, but in the thousands. The consequence of this was, of course, that on a Yom Tov, on a holiday, Ger was a bustling metropolis. Instead of being a little village, it was just overflowing with people. And not all the people were necessarily entirely honest. So if you came to the Gerer Rebbe with a lot of money, and you were staying at some hotel or in somebody's home, and you were worried about leaving with the money that you brought with you, you had to have a safe place to keep it. The best place to keep it was in the Gerer Rebbe's own home. So the wife, in the Gerer Rebbe's own home. So the Gerer Rebbe's wife, the Rebbetzin, had a safe. And all the people of means, all the people of wealth would come to her, and they would deposit in her safe whatever they brought with them, whether it was money or it was the equivalent of money, what do they call it, traveler's checks, or it was jewelry, or whatever kind of commodities it were. And she would give them a receipt. They would lock it up in the safe, and it would stay until they left. Right before they would depart, they'd come back to her with a receipt. She'd give them back their wealth. This was the safe way to do business. Every Yom Tov, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, this old schlepper would show up at the Gerer Rebbe with this old battered wallet, with a wallet that looked like it was his age, you know. And he would come to the Rebbe and say, "Here, put my money away from me." He didn't look like a rich man. He looked like a schnutter, like a schlepper. And he probably had a $1.25 in his wallet. She didn't want to make him feel bad, so she always took his wallet. She put it in the safe, and she wrote down one brown wallet. She never even opened it to look inside, because she figured there's nothing in it. It happened once that the wallet was misplaced. The wallet disappeared. He came back after Yom Tov with his receipt. He wants to collect his wallet, and she says to him, "Your wallet was misplaced." And she apologizes. And she gives him 15 zlotys, right? Whatever, 15 zlotys, $15. You're talking now in the 1850s. She figures that was certainly more money than this man could have possibly had in his wallet. He probably had $1.25. She's giving him $15. And she says to him, "I lost your wallet. I don't know how much was in it. I hope this is good." He takes the money, looks at it, thinks for a moment, looks at the Rebbe and says, "Okay, thank you," and goes. A few days later, the wallet turns up, and there's 300 zlotys in the wallet. A lot of money. A lot of money. And certainly much more money than she had given him. You know, true to form, the next Yom Tov he shows up in Ger with another old wallet. And he comes to the Rebbetzin and he gives her his wallet and he wants to get a receipt. She says, "Wait a minute. You were here last month." If he's, "Yeah." "And you gave me also another wallet." And she says, "Yeah." He says, "We found your wallet." He says, "Okay." He says, "There was 300 zlotys in the wallet." It was a lot of money. "I gave you 15 zlotys. I thought there was nothing in your wallet. You didn't say a word. How come you didn't speak up?" So he tells the Rebbe not to get a Rebbe. I was raised to know that a Rebbe needs money. Rebbes need money for all kinds of purposes, to help people with this cause, that cause. So I was raised with a philosophy, when you come to a Rebbe, you bring a lot of money. So every Yom Tov I come with this wallet full of cash. If the Rebbe needs money, he has. When you gave me back the 15 zlotys, I figured that the Rebbe needed the money. That's what the money was for. She was absolutely taken aback by this, very moved. And she goes and she tells her husband, the Gerer Rebbe, the Sfasemes, the second Gerer Rebbe. Now you have to understand, if you have a Hasidic group that has on a particular Yom Tov 10,000 Hasidim, it is impossible for every one of those people to meet the Rebbe in private. It's just impossible. There's no time. So they would walk by and shake his hand or whatever the arrangement was. She tells her husband the story. And he also is moved by it, and he summons this old supposed shnutter, this old chassid, for an audience, for a yechidus, which wasn't common. He comes into the Iggeres Rebbe, and the Iggeres Rebbe says to him, my Rebbe said, my wife told me what happened. And he says to him, we're very moved by this. Frag me was du willst nur, ask me anything you want, and I'll give it to you. So this chassid says to the Iggeres Rebbe, to the Sfas Semes, is in a few weeks it's Pesach. I'm going to be here for Pesach. I want the schus to be the Rebbe's shamish the whole 8 days of Pesach. I want the merit that for the 8 days of Pesach I should serve the Rebbe. So the Iggeres Rebbe makes for the sentence, you could have asked for millions. And you chose instead to be my shamash. This is a wonderful story. It's a wonderful story because it reveals one dimension of the Chassid-Rebbe relationship within the Chassidic tradition. Tonight's letter, which is Iggeres Hakodesh Chavez, the 22nd letter in Tanya, talks about the nature of the relationship between a Rebbe and Chassidim, and specifically a Chabad Rebbe and Chabad Chassidim, because in the old Chabad, as distinct from the modern Chabad Hasidim had a different kind of a relationship with their Rebbe than did in other Hasidic groups. And I'm going to give you a lot of information that's not in this letter. In other words, I'm going to use this letter as a springboard. Obviously, I'm going to tell you what this letter says. But in addition to telling you what this letter says, I'm also going to broaden, I'm going to open up to you this whole idea. When the Baal Shem Tov founded the Hasidic movement, of course, in many real ways, is a new philosophy. There's a lot of very, very ideas that are quite radical. And one of them is Emunah Tzadikim. Emunah Tzadikim. I'm going to translate. Whatever I say in Hebrew, I'll translate. Belief in the power that God bestows on righteous people. That God Almighty gives the Jewish nation holy men, leaders, rabbis, who have special powers. At the heart of Hasidus is the relationship between a Chassid and his Rebbe, and in general the belief that Hasidim had in the powers of their tzaddikim. And in the history of Hasidus, there have been some extraordinarily holy men with incredible spiritual powers, incredible special powers, who use these powers to help Jews and to bless Jews, do all kinds of wonderful things. And it was considered part of the relationship between a chassid and a rebbe. A chassid has a connection to his rebbe, and his rebbe helps him, often using these special powers. In other words, a significant part of the Hasidic culture was miracles. Hasidic rebbes were very special people, were given very special powers by God Almighty, and they performed miracles. And the stories that they tell about the Baal Shem Tov are unbelievable. The Baal Shem Tov himself, the Hasidic quote that addresses that phenomena is, if you believe every story, you're a fool, but if you don't believe the story could have happened, you're a heretic. In other words, the holiness of the Baal Shem Tov and many of his disciples, there are absolutely mind-boggling stories, literally mind-blowing stories of tzaddikim that are just beyond the pale, their holiness, their power, their koiches that Eibishter gave them. And it was very much a part of Hasidus. Hasidim went to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe helped them using these special powers. And it was considered a good thing. Why? Because when you're close to a holy man who has these special powers, believing in God is inspired. It's not just that you're believing in the powers of this special person, but that because you see the idea that there are individuals who can, so to speak, control the laws of nature, that are above the limitations of nature, it makes it strengthens one's emunah in Hashem. And this was the design. The Baal Shem Tov wanted people to have a connection to the tzaddik. And in having a connection to the tzaddik, as you'll see later, Mitzvah, there are a number of different levels. The Baal Shem Tov was satisfied that a chassid have a relationship with his Rebbe, with his holy master, with his tzaddik, even if the terms, the category of the relationship was based on miracles. The bottom line is, when a chassid is connected to a tzaddik, he's a better person for it. And like I said to you before, there are extraordinary stories of tzaddikim. I just want to tell you one. I just love this story, so I'm going to share it with you. This is a story just for the sake of telling a story, okay? I heard the story from a Rav who lives in Crown Heights, not the Lubavitch, and Rabbi Ruby, who heard the story from his father, who was a very chashav Yid, who when he was a child, he heard the story from the Baal HaMaisa, the Brezhan Arov. In Galicia, there was a very, very great Gaon in Pesach, the Marsham, the very, very great sage, and much of the halacha that was dealt with in Galicia during his lifetime came to him. He and the Divrei Chaim, they had big disagreements, and you'll hear soon why. He was a very great genius. As a young man, he was very, very sick. So sick, the way his father, Rabbi Reuben told me the story was, Machagetzenden Lecht. They thought he was finished. One foot on his grave, another foot on a banana peel. They lit candles, which meant they were leading him to the other world. And he came back from the dead. Mamish came back from the dead. And he related a very, very strange thing, that he had a vision. What they out-of-body experience. And in his vision, he saw himself being carried into the heavenly court. And he was brought into the heavenly court, and they judged him. He was an 18-year-old young man, a great Gaon, a great scholar. And the heavenly court judged him. What was his crime? What was his great sin? That he didn't learn Torah Lishma. That the Torah that he studied, he did for his ego and not for God. And the heavenly court said, yep, no good, send him off. They carried him out of the heavenly court, they're taking him off to the other world, and he hears screaming behind him that someone comes into the heavens and complains. And he says, this is a story happened 180 years ago. Begolus hamar hazeh, in this bitter exile, you expect that a person should learn Torah just for the sake of God. Be happy that he's learning Torah altogether. And he says, bring him back. So he's being carried back into the heavenly court. He's standing behind this mechitza, behind this curtain, and he hears this voice advocating for him and saying, you got to give this man life. The heavenly court reconvenes, they think about it again and say he can have his life back. So this 18-year-old kid in his vision says, who's my lawyer? Who just stuck up for me? So his name is Eichenstein. He comes here every day, and if he doesn't like what we do, he overturns it. Can I see him? Can I see my sponsor, the person who's giving me life back? Sure, so they pick him up, and he sees this holy man, and he comes back from the dead. Everybody knows who Eichenstein is. Eichenstein was one of the great Hasidic Rebbes in Galicia. It was called the Yiddishei Rebbe, the Ateres Tzvi. No, the Yitzchak Isaac Yiddishei. This was his nephew. The Isaac was the second one. The Isaac was Yiddishei. A famous Hasidic Rebbe, a great Kabbalist. He said, I got to go meet this man. He had no connection to Hasidus. He wasn't, the Marsham was not especially involved in Hasidus. Someone came to heaven, advocated his behalf, brought him back from the dead. So he travels to Yiddishei. And whatever, he cuts in the line. There was a long line of people. He would explain to people that he's very sick and he can't wait in line. He walks into the Yiddishei Rebbe and he recognizes him. So he passes out. And the Yiddishei Rebbe says, Vus, he said, you see a Jew for the second time, you have to faint. You see a Jew for the second time, you have to faint. I mean, these kinds of stories. There were tzaddikim, they performed miracles like people breathe. Extraordinary, unbelievable. And it was very, very much a part of the Hasidic tradition. And like I said to you before, the miracles kept the simple Chassid involved with his Rebbe. And the idea was that because of this connection, you were a better Jew. And the Baal Shem Tov introduced this dimension to Hasidus, to Judaism, that when a simple person is connected to a tzaddik, it's beneficial for everybody. In the Hayom Yom and the Rebbe's little book of daily thoughts, the Rebbe says, that he quotes the previous Rebbe who says that before Hasidus there was a loneliness. A loneliness. The great rabbi, the holy person was separate, and the common people were separate, and they didn't understand each other. Hasidus removed that loneliness. It gave common ground to the holiest of the holy, the greatest sages, the greatest minds, and the simple person. The simple person didn't become a genius. He couldn't understand what was happening in the mind of the great tzaddik and the great scholar. But Hasidus found a way to create a bond that worked, not just for the Chassid, but for the Rebbe as well. It's a very important part of the Hasidic tradition. Now, on a personal note, I grew up in Crown Heights in the 70s. I don't remember the 60s, I remember the 70s. When I was growing up, Crown Heights was still a mixed community. And today Crown Heights is virtually exclusively Lubavitch. But in the 50s and the 60s, Crown Heights was Borough Park. People came from the old country, they came to Crown Heights. They ran away from Crown Heights to Borough Park. But in Crown Heights, you had all kinds of Jews. You had a half a dozen Hasidic Rebbes. It was a happening place. And I, as a child, remember, a table full of Jews with numbers. Table, 20 Jews, Hungarian Yidelach, all who were in Auschwitz. Mamish, this was my childhood. It was a perfectly normal thing for me to see a tattoo. And these old Hungarian Jews, you have to understand, I knew them in the 70s. I mean to say, it took 25 years after the war. They were angry old men. They came to this country, they built lives, they had children, the children were beginning to grow up, I remember their weddings. But these were people who had been to hell and back, But they had Yiddish neshamas, they had Hasidic souls. They had seen the golden age of Hasidus before the war, which really it doesn't exist. The shtetl and the shtibel, the village, the little town, and at night, the shtiblach, the shuls would fill up. Every man would come to shul and sit and learn for hours. People who worked like slaves all day. There was no such thing. They saw a world of Hasidus which in America is almost impossible to find. And they had a tradition. They didn't start this tradition. This tradition was in the old country. The shul where I davened had a little room in the front, and they had this box of cake that was so old that if you bit into it, you had to make sure all your teeth were still in your mouth. They brought this box of cake after Pesach, and the next Pesach they burnt it with the chametz. Every day after davening, these old timers would go into this front room and put out the cake. Nobody touched it. Went back into the box, and the next day they took it out again. And they had schnapps. The schnapps they drank. And they would say l'chaim, a handful of people, 6, 7, 8 guys. And someone would say, today is the yard site of this tzaddik. Today is the yard site of another tzaddik. So a cascade would come. Yeah, this tzaddik, I have a story about this tzaddik. So someone would start telling a story, and immediately there were 4 versions of the story. They'd be screaming at each other. And you don't know, I know the story from this source. And I know. It was very animated. They would tell their few stories. They would drink their schnapps. They'd put the cake back into the box and leave from the shul and go to the train to go to work. This was a daily routine. This was part of the old Hasidic tradition, telling stories of tzaddikim. And the purpose of telling the stories of tzaddikim was the stories, the belief in miracles made God realer, made a relationship with God something which you could touch. And it was very, very much a part of the tradition of Hasidus. The Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, deviated from that tradition. And in fact, the criticism that was levied against the Alter Rebbe, the objections that the other Hasidic masters had to Chabad, the reason Chabad was, so to speak, isolated from the mainstream of Hasidus, I believe primarily was geography. We were in Russia and they were in Galicia, but that means Austria-Hungary at that time. But another reason was because Chabad had a different philosophy. And the Alter Rebbe created a Hasidus that de-emphasized miracles. It didn't consider the Chassid-Rebbe relationship revolving around the performance of miracles. The Chabad Rebbes also performed many miracles. There are incredible stories. But it wasn't the priority in the Hasidus. In fact, it was de-emphasized in the Hasidus. The expression that they used to use was, the miracles were rolling around under the table, nobody had time to bend down and pick them up. This was, the Alter Rebbe said it about the Holy Maggid, and one of the Alter Rebbe's granddaughters said it about her grandfather, that miracles were rolling under the table. People were busy with Hasidus. They weren't busy with miracles. The reference, the allusion, the form that reveals this, so to speak, split within Hasidus is the following. The Gemara says, the Talmud says, that the Navi Habakkuk, the prophet Habakkuk, reduced Judaism to one principle. The Talmud says, Judaism is 613 mitzvahs. It's a lot of commandments. But you can generalize them into narrower and narrower groups. Bo Habakkuk v'amidin alachas. Habakkuk, the Navi, Habakkuk, came along and he made the whole Judaism into one principle. What is the principle? V'tzadik be'emunasa yich. V'tzadik be'emunato yichya. Which means the righteous lives by his faith. Now what does that mean? V'tzadik be'emunasa yichya. The righteous live by his faith. So in the Hasidic tradition, they would say, Al Tikri Yichya El Yechai. Tzaddik means a holy man. Be'emunah say, when people have belief in him, when people travel to him and people have a connection to him, Yechai, he gives them life. In other words, the tzaddik is a special person, the holy man, who's very close to God, and as long as Hasidim travel to a Rebbe and have a relationship with a holy person, they have a connection to life. But the Alter Rebbe said, no, tzaddik means every single Jew. Doesn't mean the holy man. Like it does in the Mishnah. V'amech kulam tzaddikim, we're all righteous. Be'emunasa yichya means that every Jew has to live by his own faith. The life, the vitality, the energy of Judaism comes from emunah, which we have to extract from within ourselves. In other words, there is a basic division within the traditions of Hasidus about what is the role of a tzaddik. In non-Chabad Hasidic movements, the role of tzaddik was to inspire Hasidim, to give Hasidim faith. The Chabad belief was the role of the tzaddik is to teach people how to inspire themselves. You don't go to a tzaddik to have your neshama charged up. You go to a tzaddik to have your mind charged up. And then you have to use the information, the teaching, the philosophy that you heard by your Rebbe to inspire yourself. Which explains, amongst other things, why in the Chabad movement there's so much philosophy, so much teaching, so much knowledge. The entire Hasidic library, if you can gather all the Hasidic books for all the Hasidic masters, it's approximately the same size as the Chabad library alone. Because the Chabad knowledge was very important. The maimer, the discourse, the teaching was very, very important. Because the role of the Rebbe was different. Not just practically, but in shita, in philosophy, in principle. The Alter Rebbe didn't want the role of the tzaddik to be to shortcut a chassid to emunah, but to give a path, to teach a chassid how to get closer to God through his own efforts. Or to say what I'm saying in different words, and if you will, to broaden the scope of this. What does a Rebbe want from his Hasidim? You know, Hasidim go to a Rebbe, they have an interest. The Rebbe greets his Hasidim. What is his interest? And of course the answer is the Rebbe's interest is that we should serve God. The purpose of a Hasidic Rebbe is that when you have a relation with him, you are more likely to be a better servant of God. That's his interest. He wants Hashem should be real to us. Torah and mitzvah should be precious to us. And we should do it with devoutness and care and exactness and beyond the letter of the law and so forth. This is what a Rebbe wants from his Hasidim. Every Rebbe did this using a different technique. The Alter Rebbe, in creating the Chabad movement, did this using the technique of teaching. He taught mysticism, he taught Hasidus, he taught Hasidic philosophy, and the purpose and the idea was that if Hasidim would learn this philosophy and contemplate, meditate, be mitbonen, think about this philosophy, it'll arouse within them feelings for God that will make their experience of being a Jew more meaningful. This is a basic difference in philosophy between Chabad and other Hasidic movements. I'm generalizing. You understand, everybody understands that Hasidus is not a monolith. There are really distinctive philosophies within the Hasidic world, but this is a very basic difference in the Alter Rebbe and other Hasidus. But nothing is ever that simple. Nothing is ever that simple. Which means to say that in other Hasidic groups, there were Hasidim who had a Chabad-like relationship with their Rebbe. And within the Chabad movement, there were many Hasidim who had very simple relationships with their Rebbe, which were based on miracles. I mean, the story I started with is a story of a Iggeres Chassid who had a Chabad philosophy. He didn't come to his Rebbe to take. He came to his Rebbe to give. What is a Chassid? A Chassid comes to his Rebbe to take ruchnius, spirituality, and he brings his wallet full of money, because a Chassid is supposed to give. His Rebbe says to him, I am impressed with your Hasidus, I want to offer you an opportunity. And the Iggeres Rebbe was a big tzaddik. If he would say to the Iggeres Rebbe, I want to be a millionaire, the Iggeres Rebbe would give him a blessing and be a millionaire. He says, I want to be the Iggeres Rebbe's servant. That's a philosophy. This was a deep chassid. I guess in that culture we call him a kotzkin. His concept of what a tzaddik is and what a rebbe is that a rebbe is holy. And the greatest reward you have for a relationship with the Rebbe is the relationship itself. Not how the Rebbe gives you blessings and the blessings happen and it's all wonderful. That's, using my language, it's a Chabad kind of a Chassid Rebbe relationship. So, the letter we're about to read is the Alter Rebbe himself, the founder of the Chabad movement, who created a movement that taught that the role of a Rebbe is to teach Chassidim how to serve God. It's not about miracles. It's not about coming to a Rebbe and the Rebbe solves your material problems by saying a kapitel tilim for you, whatever the case is. But you come to a Rebbe for Avodas Hashem. The Alter Rebbe himself objected to the fact that his Chassidim were using him for other purposes. Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe also came to the Rebbe for blessings and for miracles and for all kinds of material payback. And the Alter Rebbe is saying, this is not Chassidus, this is not what my Chassidus is about. And to a great extent, the truth of the matter is the following. And this is all my introduction, but I guess I can allow myself to give conclusions before I start. I'm going to share with you the content of this letter, but I feel, especially with us and our Rebbe, that the relationship between a Rebbe and a Chassid is defined by the relationship of the Chassid and the Rebbe, which means to say, a bigger Chassid has a deeper Rebbe. A simpler Chassid has a simpler Rebbe. Which means to say, two Chassidim will come to their Rebbe. To one, the Rebbe will be very kind and generous. To the other, the Rebbe will be very, very critical. It's not because the Rebbe is mean, but because the Rebbe understands that this is a bigger Chassid. And he has a capacity for a deeper relationship. A deeper relationship means that a Chassid doesn't come to his Rebbe for a blessing and for a smile. A Chassid comes for a Rebbe for a derech, for a path and avodas Hashem. And when a Chassid is deficient, when a Chassid is slacking off in his actualizing his possibility as a Chassid, the Rebbe says to the Chassid, I can be nice to you. You don't want that. I want to tell you the truth. Because the truth, as painful as it may be, is what you need to hear. Because this is the only way you're going to grow. I'll tell you one of the most haunting stories in the Chassidic history. But I'm not going to tell you the haunting part. So you're not going to know why it's haunting. I'm just going to tell you the beginning of the story. There was a very, very great Chassidic Rebbe by the name of the Koshnitzer Maggid. He was so Koshnitzer. He was a holy man and a great sage. When he passed away, he was succeeded by his son, who was called Rabbi Koshnitzer. Rabbi Koshnitzer Maggid's son. This son of the Koshnitzer Maggid, for reasons that no one will know, like many other Chassidic masters, did not allow people to see his knowledge of Torah. He acted like as if he wasn't a scholar. He was a big scholar, but it was a big secret. And the result of this was that the Misnagdim, the non-Chassidim, would come around and make fun of him. Say, a holy man doesn't know how to read Gemara, that kind of argument. So the Koshnitzer Maggid, the Moshe Koshnitzer, was always surrounded by disciples who would defend him. Then when the Misnagdim would come and start asking questions, and he, of course, wouldn't answer, there was always somebody there who could put them in their place. One of the greatest Talmidim of the Koshnitzer Maggid was the Chidush Harim, the first Gerrer Rebbe. We're talking about the Gerrer movement. The first Gerrer Rebbe, he was very close to the Koshnitzer Maggid, and he was a Gaon Olam, he was an incredible Talmud Chacham, and whenever the Misnagdim would come and pester his Rebbe, he would show them who knows how to learn, and they would go away with their tail between their legs. One time, a group of people came to the Koshnitzer Maggid, and they started to ask him all kinds of questions, and of course he would respond. The Gerrer Rebbe, his Talmud, sat next to his master. He answered all of their questions, and they went away happy. And when they left, the Koshnitzer Maggid says to his disciple, "Itchemayer meviltzach dir akishtin." You speak Yiddish. Svadi. You understood what I just said? Itchemayer, Yitzchak Meir in Polish Yiddish. Yitzchak Meir, Itchemayer. I want to kiss you. In other words, he was so excited by how well he had dealt with the question, he said, I'd love to give you a kiss. So the Gerrer Rebbe said, in Yiddish, Ich darf nicht haben ma Rebbe was kischt mich, ich darf haben ma Rebbe was rast für mich sticke. You understand that?
Oh, yes.
It's about time. He said, I don't need a Rebbe who kisses me. I need a Rebbe who cuts my flesh. He left the Koshnitzer Maggid, never came back. He went to the Kotzker Rebbe, and I can assure you the Kotzker Rebbe didn't hand out kisses. If you wanted to be cut down to size, that was the place to go. There's an end to the story. There's a rest of the story which is very painful. Huh? You've heard of Kotsk, Hasidus Kotsk?
I know Kotsk. Kotsk is the cactus part.
Okay, and the Kotsk Rebbe certainly was in that spirit. So you see here, different Hasidim had different relationships with the Rebbe. A bigger Chassid had what we would call in the Chabad culture, or more pnimius connection to his Rebbe, which means to say, you come to the Rebbe to be a better servant of God, not for what the service you can get from the Rebbe, in terms of blessings, in terms of health, and things like this. And in the strictest Chabad tradition, I told this story to you just the other week, we talked about tzedakah. Hasidim were embarrassed, literally embarrassed, to share with their Rebbe their material ills. If Chassid was ill, Chassid lost money, Chassid was having trouble with his children, whatever the case was, Chabad Hasidim went to the Rebbe just for ruchnis, just for a derech and avodas Hashem. They would never share with the Rebbe their material problems, because that's not what the Rebbe was for. That's not what how Hasidus Chabad saw the role of a Rebbe. So here, you have a letter, which is poignant, to say the least. It's a strong letter. And the Alter Rebbe says, if you will, I am going to be honest. I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling. In other words, normally, one of the great tricks of holy people is that you never know what they're thinking. Mamish. We know this from the Rebbe also. The Rebbe would be smiling, and he was very upset. The Rebbe could look very, very serious, and he was very happy. You never knew. With the Rebbe, there were layers, many layers, and you never knew what mask you were visiting. But the Rebbe said, I'm going to tell you what's going on inside. I'm going to hide my love and expose my rebuke. I'm going to tell you what I think. And he says, Hasidim have begun to travel to me and asking me questions about their material needs, their business, their health, their livelihood, all kinds of things. He says, that's not my job. I'm a Rebbe. What does a Rebbe do? He teaches people how to serve God. That's his role. Rebbe's purpose is to connect Yidden to Hashem, to give them a derech, to give them a path that they can journey down in order to have a relationship with the Eibishter. And this business, says the Alter Rebbe, of people coming to me and asking me to help them resolve their parnasa questions or their health questions, this is not for me. What about the fact, continues the Alter Rebbe, that if you read the Tanakh in ancient times, people did go to holy men to help them with things. He brings an example. Shaul HaMelech, the King Shaul, how did he meet the prophet Samuel the first time? His father had a herd of donkeys that disappeared in the desert. And he heard that the prophet was nearby. And he went to the prophet, that the prophet should tell him where the donkeys were. He knew the prophet knows everything. So the Alter Rebbe says, prophets have open eyes. Prophets know. Prophets see. Prophets can actually help people with material things. But there's a big difference between a prophet and a rabbi. This is the Alter Rebbe's argument. You don't come to a rabbi, you don't come to a Hasidic Rebbe with your issues. Only prophets, as existed in Israel in ancient times, they were actually able to help people, not just spiritually, but materially as well. My role is I teach people how to serve the Eibishter. This business of people coming to me and asking me to help them with their material needs is out of place. It's misplaced. Now, this letter, as it's published in the Tanya, is not complete. Because when the Tanya was printed, the Alter Rebbe's children cut out the beginnings and the ends of the letters, because they were personal and they just dealt with community issues, and they put in only the part of the letter that they felt was a message for all time. But if you look at the letter in the original, you'll see what the Alter Rebbe writes. He writes, I'm different than the other Hasidic masters. I have too many Hasidim, and I'm also too sensitive. I can't listen to people's tzaddas. I just can't. It's overwhelming to me to have to constantly hear about all the hardships that people are having. Please, don't burden me with these things. I'm prepared to be a Rebbe. I'm prepared to shepherd my flock. But my role is to teach them how to serve the Eibishter, period. It's not my job to help people with their material interests and needs. And he therefore says, please stop coming to me with such questions. But this is the easy part of the letter. Then the plot thickens. Then you have a theology. And the theology is incredibly powerful. And I am going to tell it to you straight. Just as Alter Rebbe said it to his Hasidim straight, I'm going to tell it to you straight. What you're about to hear is strong. I'm giving it to you, I'm telling you in advance. This is a very, very strong message. But I want to preface by telling you a little story. The Alter Rebbe, as a young man, was a disciple of the Holy Maggid of Mezritch, of Doiber of Mezritch. And on one of his stays in Mezritch, he overheard a discussion. Two of his friends were arguing about what they would do if they were God. What would I do if I was God? I was in somebody's house who's got an attitude, and he says, God made a terrible world because he didn't consult me. A room full of people, and this guy gets up and makes the statement, God made a terrible world because he didn't consult me. Now, I had to respond. I couldn't keep quiet. How am I going to respond? So I said, I want everybody to know what God said in response to that comment. He will get smarter. He will get smarter. Anyway, the Alter Rebbe overhears this conversation within several of his contemporaries, what they would do if they were God. One guy said, if I was God, I would be absolutely merciless. There'd be no gray. I'd come down on the sinner with a hammer, and nobody would sin. I wouldn't practice as Erech HaPayim, giving people second chances and third chances, and making you believe you're not paying attention. Someone does something wrong, someone does something right, the reward should be immediate, and everybody would behave. The other fellow says, if I was God, I would be infinitely kind. I would punish never. I would just be so kind and so generous and so giving. I would spoil people into discovering me and serving me. So the Alter Rebbe overhears this exchange. One person said, if I was God, I'd be draconian and tough. The other one says, I'd be full of love. Says the Alter Rebbe, and if I was God, I would do exactly what God is doing. And this is what the Alter Rebbe says here. People have a destiny. They have a path. They have a life. As religious people, as believers, this script, our life, was written for us by God. Not everything that occurs to us in our lives do we necessarily like. Or to use a classic American allusion, not everything that God does to us in our lives do we agree with. We disagree. God has his opinion, I have mine. So we want to alter it. We want to alter it. This is the destiny God gave me. This is the life that I have. I want to fix it. Right? In America, we try to be in control. Why do we want to fix it? Why do we want to fix it? We want to fix it because the challenges of our lives hurt. They're painful. And the painful challenges that we have in our lives make our worship, our ability to have a relationship with God more difficult. So we travel hundreds of miles and come to a holy man and say, listen, I'd love to daven, but I got a chronic backache. Take away my backache and I'll be the most religious man in the neighborhood. So you come to a Rebbe, and a Rebbe has special koiches, he can heal your backache and you daven without any pain. I have a hole in my wallet, or even if I don't have a hole, but the wallet is empty. Fill the wallet, fill my belly, and I'll be the best Jew in the world. So you want to alter the plan that Eibishter has for you. So the Alter Rebbe says, if I were God, I would do exactly as God is doing. If this is the script God wrote for you, this is your script. Why would you want to change it? The holy Badichev, the great Levi Yitzchak of Badichev, had a chassid who was terribly challenged, had a lot of problems. And amongst his challenges was he was very, very poor. He was a big chassid, but an empty wallet. So he comes to his Rebbe and says, listen, Rebbe, I know you have got special connections on high. Please go to the heavens, go to God Almighty, and negotiate for me. The Gemara says, the Talmud says that when a person, Rosh Hashanah comes, we're judged how much parnasa we're going to have for a year. Tell God, I want to get my yearly income in a lump sum. Instead of having to squeeze it out, eke it out a penny here, penny, let him give me everything I'm going to earn this year, and I'll even take a cut. I won't worry about it. God will give me what I'm supposed to earn for a year on Rosh Hashanah. I'm not going to have one penny more. I'll ration my money. I'm about to learn and daven. Like this, I end up getting whatever panasah, whatever sustenance God wants me to get, but I'm so busy worrying about it and agonizing about it, I can't daven, I can't learn. So the Badichev said, and this is a powerful Yiddish statement, wer sucht, dass der Rebbeinu soll darf haben dein Teure und viele Efshe darf haben dein Matanish. Moshe understands. Who says God needs your davening and your learning. Maybe it's your struggle that He wants. And this is the message Alter Rebbe says. He says, a father loves his children. It doesn't mean that everything a father does for his children is peaches and cream, is a bowl of cherries. Often, in the relationship between a father and a child, there are aspects, there are details, which are quite severe. But everybody understands that whatever a father gives his child is love. Moreover, there's an argument to be made that the honesty that the father gives his child, which is the painful part of the relationship, may in fact be the deepest connection. The ability for God to be honest with a Jew and give a Jew what God thinks that Jew needs reflects, as they said in Tanya chapter 26, a certain respect. If a person, Rashi brings a Chumash, a very interesting thing from the Talmud, that when King Solomon built the temple, when King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, built the first Beis HaMikdash, he said a prayer. He says, when a Jew comes to this house of worship, give him what they deserve. When a Gentile comes to this house of worship, give him whatever they ask. And that doesn't sound fair. A Jew comes to the house of worship, he gets what he deserves. A Gentile comes to the house of worship, he gets whatever he wants. Says Rashi, why? Because in the relationship between God and the Jewish people, there's an understanding. The understanding is it's not just what He gives us. In fact, He gives us what He gives us simply so that we can come to the house of God. It's about worship. A Gentile, a person who's not initiated, who doesn't understand that, if God doesn't give him what he asks for, he's going to stop believing. This is what the Alter Rebbe is saying. But on a high level, why are people coming to me and asking of me to pray on their behalf that they should win the lottery or they should be recover from an illness or whatever other issue they're going through? This is God's script for you. God is your Father and He loves you. Why would you turn your back on your Father? That's how He words it. Everybody knows that the relationship between God and His people is very, very special. There's a very direct, very intimate connection between God and His people. But if we have such a powerful relationship with God, naturally, part of the depth of the integrity of that relationship is criticism. It's criticism. I had a teacher as a teenager. I was very close to him. But there were things that I couldn't take. I was 17, 18, 19 years old, and I used to write essays. I have a collection, half a dozen, on Hasidus. I wrote them for myself. I never published them. They're sitting in a drawer someplace. And I worked very hard. I mean, believe me, I'm probably embarrassed of what I had written then. I was a teenager, but I worked hard. I would write 10-page essays. I'd bring them to my teacher. He would read them. I can't say the same for my students. My students' teacher doesn't have that much patience. He would read everything I wrote. And he would spend time reading it. And after he would read it, he would criticize it. And I would plot. You can't say something nice. You can't compliment me. I mean, it took me years to get over this. He says, the greatest compliment I can give you is that I'm critiquing it. He's right. But I wasn't, at that time in my life, I wasn't prepared to hear that. I was an incredibly emotional teenager, and I needed to be told, nobody could tell me enough times that I'm good. I was that kind of kid. But this is what the Alter Rebbe is saying. The Eibishter's challenges that He bestows upon a person are a reflection of God's honesty. And you have in other places in Tanya. God can be kind to us, and God can be honest with us. God's honesty is a much greater kindness, but it hurts. Says the Alter Rebbe, first of all, why are you coming to me? Why are you coming to me? I am not what we call in our culture a prophet. I'm a rabbi. I'm a rebbe. To a rebbe you come for eitzes, for counsel in matters of avodas Hashem, spiritual things. Moreover, if this is what God wants for you, this is what's right for you, why are you turning your back on the love that God is bestowing upon you? This is the two-part argument that the Alter Rebbe presents here. And he says, listen, you want my opinion? Well, my opinion? He gives a very, very weird allusion. Based on a pasuk, he says, a father loves his child so much, he diapers him. He pampers, he cleans up his waste, his excrement. The Eibishter loves us so much, he pampers us. But not pampers us as we understand it, in the sense of spoiling us. He deals with our schmutz. And the Alter Rebbe said that you're asking me, when a person has a challenge, instead of running to a tzaddik and asking for a miracle, asking for a reprieve, do tshuva. Figure out what in your life needs correction and correcting it, because that's probably where these challenges are coming from. This is what the Alter Rebbe says. And he continues to say, of course, that the greatest thing we have in our relationship with God is our relationship with God. It's not what we get materially from the relationship, it's the relationship itself. Says the Alter Rebbe, if we had that mindset, we wouldn't run away from the hand that God has dealt us, we would deal with it and appreciate this as our Father. This is this letter. This is the thrust of this letter. So the Alter Rebbe is writing to his Hasidim. And as I said to you in my introduction, the heart of this letter is, Chabad has a different philosophy of why a person goes to a tzaddik, why a person goes to whatever. Chabad holds you go to whatever to learn how to serve God rather than have miracles performed for you and all kinds of other goodies. And he makes two objections to his Hasidim, the Rebbe's Hasidim, the first generation, who was certainly the greatest we ever had. A, why are you coming to me? Who am I? B, why are you having a relationship with God where God is giving you a slap in the face, and instead of saying thank you, is saying no thank you? It's an act of love. These are the two arguments. Ad kan ha-Iggeres Hakodesh. This is the letter we just read. But there's a few things I need to share with you. One of them is historic, and one of them is more immediate, more recent. How close it does. The Alter Rebbe says, I'm not a prophet. And because I'm not a prophet, asking me a question about your health is foolish. I'm not a doctor. Asking me a question about your finance is foolish. I'm not a businessman. Asking a question about child rearing, I'm not a child psychologist. It's not my expertise. So he says to Hasidim, don't ask me such questions. I have an area of excellence, which is to teach people how to serve the Eibishter, according to the derech of Hasidus, which I got from my holy masses, I got from my teachers. What do you come? So the observation that's made is the Alter Rebbe wrote this letter, complained about the fact that Hasidim were asking questions about material things, but continued answering. If the Alter Rebbe truly believed that he wasn't the prophet, in other words, that he wasn't qualified to help people about their material issues, he should have said, I can't help you. And the reality was, he wrote this letter, and explain it as you wish, but of course the simple way is, in his humility, he said, I'm not qualified to answer such questions, I'm not a prophet, I'm just a rabbi. The next day, a chassid came into him and asked him a question, and he gave him an answer. You know, the Rebbe Rashav used to say, I understand nothing about business. So someone said to me, Rebbe, how could you say you understand nothing about business? People come to you, they get your advice, and they do so well in the market. He says, what am I supposed? People come and ask me questions. So I got to give them an answer. So I give them an answer. Understand that as you wish. But the Alter Rebbe continued answering people's questions, which meant to say that by his own assessment, by his own judgment of self, he's conceding that although he says, I'm not a prophet, there was a prophetic quality to the Alter Rebbe, which is a bit of a controversy. You know, the Talmud speaks about there being no prophets outside of Israel, no prophets nowadays. Some of the Hasidic Rebbes were actually called prophets. One of the greatest of all was a Jew by the name of the Chayzer Melublin. You ever heard of the Chayzer Melublin? Chayzer means seer. Seer means they had holy eyes. Jose.
The way you say it, I'm trying to understand it. It's Indian. Jose. It's very difficult.
Chayzer means a contract.
You throw me into a no man's land, and I'm trying very hard.
I'm going to Ashkenazize you slowly. I wouldn't want to do that.
That's why
You have to bring your emunah to Ashkenaz.
That's why the Mashiach is mitban. Yeah, he doesn't understand half his people.
Huh? Which half?
Your half.
I beg to differ. He loves all Jews equally, and he
Rabbi, I can give you letters you cannot pronounce.
Don't worry about it. I'm not going to say now, but Mashiach is you do just fine.
No problem.
I want to remind you, Moshe Rabbeinu could barely speak, and he was a fine Mashiach. Don't worry. Anyway, so it's brought down that although the Alter Rebbe wrote, "Don't ask me such questions, I'm not a prophet," he continued answering such letters, which is an indication of the fact that he did have special powers. Like I said to you, the Choyzer, the Lublin, was called the Choyzer because he had open eyes. In other words, some of these tzaddikim, some of these holy men, whatever word you want to use, had very, very special koiches and Eibishter from God Almighty, and they used these special powers to help people in all kinds of different ways. So here the Alter Rebbe is writing a letter of objection, and at the same time he continues to encourage what it is he's objecting to by answering people's letters. And I got to tell you a story, and I don't need to tell you the story. This story is being told just for the sake of telling a story, because it's one of those stories that just every time you tell it, you get a special kick out of it. A group of Jews came to this same Alter Rebbe, who had written this letter complaining about the fact that Hasidim were coming to him about material questions. They were farmers that lived, I guess, in the Ukraine, and there was no rain, which meant to say that they were going to starve, their crops were going to dry, and it's going to be terrible. They traveled great distances. They came to the Alter Rebbe. They went to the Alter Rebbe's room and said, Rebbe, we have an issue. It hasn't rained. If we don't have any rain, it's going to be terrible. So the Alter Rebbe looked at them and, I'll speak to the Creator. I can't help you. They walked out of the Alter Rebbe's room devastated, because they understood that if the Alter Rebbe is not giving him a bracha, as the expression goes, it's sealed. It's sealed, finished. They're not going to have rain. They walked out of them, they were shaking. They were very upset. The Alter Rebbe's grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, who would be the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, couldn't have been more than 22 years old, because he was 22 when his grandfather passed away. So he was young, but he was the Tzemach Tzedek, he was a genius and also very holy. And he sees these people walk out of the Alter Rebbe's room, and they were visibly upset, shaken. He says, what happened? He says, we are farmers. We need rain. We came to your grandfather and asked him to pray for rain. He told us he can't help us, so we know our fate is sealed. We're in deep trouble. So Tzemach said, you have a couple of rubles, you have a few dollars, a couple of hundreds, let's grease the wheels. So they give him money, a nice amount of money. Tzemach Tzedek calls over the Alter Rebbe's shamish. It means his butler, the person who shined his shoes. A simple man who was taking care of the Alter Rebbe. He says, I am going to give you money. A lot of money. On a condition. The condition is that I want you to swear that whatever I'm going to tell you to do, you'll do. And he shows him the cash. This man has never seen so much money in his life. So he agrees, takes the money, and he swears. He figures Tzemach Tzedek's not going to tell him to become a goy. Swear to do whatever I say. He says, fine. I want you to go into my grandfather and tell my grandfather the following. If you're not a Rebbe, who gave you the right to destroy the pleasure of material things from so many thousands of Jews? To take away from so many thousands of Jews the pleasure of material things. Because you become a chassid, you worry only about God. And if you are a Rebbe, and people come to you and they need your help and you don't want to help them, then you're cruel. Why are you being so cruel? People need rain. If you can help them, help them. So Tzemach Tzedek says to the Shamish, go into my Zayder and tell him, if you're not a Rebbe, who authorized you to destroy people's enjoyment of the material world? And if you are, why are you such an achzer? Why are you so cruel? People need help, but I don't want to help them. So the Shamish takes the money out of his pocket and he says, here, you can have your money back. Deal is off. He wasn't going to go into the Alter Rebbe. It's a chutzpah, it's such disrespect. He says, you swore. You're bound by an oath. They negotiated, it didn't help him. Anyway, the Shamish goes into the Alter Rebbe and he says to the Alter Rebbe, if you're not a Rebbe, who gave you the right to destroy people's enjoyment of the material world? And if you are a Rebbe, why are you being so cruel? Jews need rain, why don't you pray for them? The Alter Rebbe thought, raises his head, says, it'll rain. And he adds, das ist Mistama Mendel's Arbeit. This was pulled off by Mendel. He knew right away that his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, was mixed into the story. So the Shamish walks out and he tells the people, the Rebbe said it'll be rain. And he also said that Mendel is involved. So everybody gathered around Mendel. He said to him, so how do you know? He says, it's an explicit Gemara. The Gemara in Tainus, the tractate Ta'anit, doesn't talk about fasts. It talks about rain. You have to know where to find things in the Shas. And there's a story in Masechta Ta'anit where there was no rain. Yeah, you know the Gemara. There's different Gemaras. They came to a rabbi and they asked him to pray and he couldn't. Didn't want. So they criticized him. They belittled him. And it rained. So Tzemach Tzedek says, what's the meaning of this Gemara? You come to a rabbi, you ask him to pray, he doesn't want to pray, so you put him down and it rains. He said, sometimes a rabbi is so high up in the heights of heavens, he has nothing to do with the material world. So you can't pray for rain. You have to bring him down. How do you bring a rabbi down to the heights of heavens? You mavatal him. You tell him off. You bring him from a higher level to a lower level. He has a connection to material things and is able to bring rain. So the fact that our Rabbeim, and not just our Rabbeim, many Hasidic groups, their holy masters, practice this. People used to come to them and ask them for brachas and for eitzes, and the Rabbeim used to perform miracles, like people breathe, is because they did have some concept of what Alter Rebbe calls here a prophecy. Whatever word you want to use, even though the Alter Rebbe says himself that he has no shaykhs to such things. I'll tell you some interesting things about our Rebbe. First, I want to tell you an incredible story of the Rebbe, our Rebbe. A Lubavitcher young man, a shliach from Boston, goes to the oil, goes to the Rebbe's resting place. This is around 1997. It's 5 in the morning. I mean, the oil is open 24 hours a day. It's an incredibly peaceful place. I've never been to the oil. You don't have to be a chassid. You walk into that. It's incredible. It's a place of unbelievable peace. You feel the peace. You can touch it. And he sees a Satmar Yid, the guy with big payas, 5 in the morning, doesn't want to get caught. His head will be lynched. With his 2 young boys, schleps them into their twins, and he tells them the mama, they should recite a Hasidic discourse. They were bar mitzvah boys, they were turning 13, and he wanted them to recite a Hasidic discourse by the resting place of the Rebbe. This Lubavitcher looks at this guy, he recognizes him, he knows him from himself, he's seen him before. So when they leave the oil, he says to him, why are you, a Satmar Yid, bringing your 2 kids here to recite a Maimon at 5 o'clock in the morning, and you look mighty familiar? He says, I'll tell you the story. He said, I was married for many years, I had no children. I had gone to my Rebbe many times and I had no kids. So I came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe on Lag Ba'omer. That was the day for kids. He wanted kids, they came Lag Ba'omer. I know people, I know a woman on my block. She had children after 18 years of marriage. 2 sets of twins, a boy and a girl, 18 years of marriage. Lag Ba'omer. I can tell you stories people told me. Mamish, the miracles of the Rebbe with children, especially Lag Ba'omer, it's unreal. So he's standing by the mikveh, I guess, and there's scores of people, all of them childless. Everybody knows, Lag Ba'omer, you come to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe is a very busy man, and the people around him have the responsibility of keeping the Rebbe moving. So the Rebbe is being confronted, attacked by all of these broken souls, and he gives everybody 5 seconds. I mean, the Rebbe did things so quickly. But the people who are supposed to help the Rebbe to go from his house to his car, from the mikveh to his car, are supposed to keep people away. And it's very sensitive, because people are not coming there to say hello to the Rebbe. They have deep issues. On the other hand, the Rebbe can't stand around. There was a time and a place for everything. He's a Satmar, which means he comes from a Hasidic background, and he understands Hasidic chutzpah. Rebbe respect. You got to get what you need to get on what you need to get there. So the people who are trying to keep the crowd control, are pushing people back. He fights his way through these guys, runs up to the Rebbe. The Rebbe was sitting in the car. He was about to close the door. He pokes his head into the Rebbe's face and says, Rebbe ben Zocher, Rebbe, I want a son. The Rebbe looks up at him and says to him, who's he going to play with? He needs a playmate. He was taken aback. So the Rebbe says to him, who's he going to play with? He needs a playmate. So the Rebbe says, Zog Amen. Say Amen. So he said Amen, and these are his twins. So he had his boys learn the Rebbe's Maimon for the bar mitzvah. And he brought them to the oil. Here is the background. Okay, the previous Rebbe was the Rebbe's father-in-law and teacher, and the previous Rebbe, the Rebbe loved his father-in-law, and the Rebbe was living in France. The previous Rebbe was living in Poland, and they corresponded. And the Rebbe was always, I'm sorry to use this word, but this is the word that's appropriate. He was always milking his father. He was always trying to get more information. He was constantly asking him questions, so that his father-in-law would give him a lot of the Chabad history and Chabad philosophy and Chabad tradition. So there was an exchange between the Rebbe and his father-in-law about miracles, where the previous Rebbe wrote him a letter, a long letter, where he discusses the difference between what we call in our culture Chabad and Paltiel. Chabad Hasidus versus other Hasidus. That in other Hasidus, miracles were so important, and Chabad miracles were not that important. And in that letter, he tells a story. And the story goes like this: that Reb Shlomo Karliner was a contemporary of the Alter Rebbe. He passed away in 1792. That's a few days ago. Okay, he was Alter Rebbe's friend. He disagreed with Alter Rebbe vehemently about Chabad. He was one of the strongest critics of Alter Rebbe, and he lived in Russia. He was very close to the Alter Rebbe. So in many cities in Russia, you had two Hasidic groups, each very dedicated to their Rebbes, that in principle had strong disagreement. And when Hasidim get passionate, it's a sight to see. You had Karliner Hasidim and Liozhner Hasidim, they didn't see eye to eye at all. The worst thing that could have happened was when you had a turncoat. If somebody switched allegiance, if you went from Chabad to Karlin or vice versa, so you were caught between a rock and a hard place. Your old friends would rip you to shreds. There was a Karliner Chassid who became a Chabad Chassid. He became a Chassid with the Alter Rebbe. And his former friends couldn't suffer the indignity that one of theirs went over to the other side. And every chance they got, they would pester him. What was their issue? They would say, your Rebbe is a great God, great scholar, great servant of God. Miracles by us. Miracles in Paltiel. Chabad doesn't have miracles. And it bothered this kid, because it was true. By Hasidei Paltiel, there were unbelievable miracles. The Rabbi performed miracles constantly. In Chabad, miracles were not the biggest thing on the thing. The important thing was the Hasidus, the Maimon. So this young man is walking around with this sense of pain and inadequacy, you know. How come my Rebbe doesn't perform miracles and other Rebbes perform miracles? In those days, the Alter Rebbe used to correspond with what was called the mashpia. It was a structure, it was a hierarchy, which meant the Alter Rebbe used to write a letter to, so to speak, the leader of the Hasidic kibbutz, Hasidic group, and he would pass along messages to each Hasid from the Alter Rebbe. One day, the mashpia in this town gets a letter from the Alter Rebbe. Mashpia was their spiritual leader, with directions and instructions and thoughts for each one of the Hasidim. And by this young man, he wrote these words: "Tell him I'm thinking of him. This should be this should be for you a sign and for your friends a miracle." Tell him I'm thinking about him. For him it's a sign. This is for you a sign, and for your friends it's a miracle. So the previous Rebbe tells the Rebbe this story and explains. The Alter Rebbe, with Ruach Kachi, with his holy vision, saw that this chassid was being pestered, heckled. So he responded. He says, but I'm not performing the miracle for you. I'm performing the miracle for them. For you, it's a sign. So the previous Rebbe and the Rebbe had this exchange, where the previous Rebbe downplays the place of miracles within the Chabad tradition. And the Rebbe, very uncharacteristically, argues with his father-in-law. A written correspondence. He writes to his father-in-law and says, perhaps this was a good idea in the olden days when Hasidim were real. Hasidim were on a higher level. Today we can use all the spiritual help we can get. I believe that Chabad should also resort to the performance of miracles. And the previous Rebbe writes back to him and says, nope. Anyway, this disagreement obviously still exists, because a Rebbe, a Chabad Rebbe who performed miracles like our Rebbe did is unheard of. I mean, every person who went by the Rebbe Dallas was a Nacham Leifus, constantly giving blessings, performing miracles, helping people. But I want to finish this class with another emphasis, with another perspective. And that is, having a relationship with a holy man is weird, because you never really know the terms of the relationship. You don't know what it means to be a holy man. We don't know at all it means to be a holy man. We just know that the more we learn about a holy man, the more we realize how little we understand what a holy man is. His connections, his levels, or as I said to you before, his masks, his layers. There were so many Rebbes. You never knew which Rebbe, what dimension you were meeting. But this is true. The relationship between a Rebbe and a Chassid has everything to do with the relationship between a Chassid and a Rebbe. That means, if we were smaller people, we had a smaller Rebbe. If we were bigger people, we had a bigger Rebbe. Practically, that means to say, if we were smaller people, the Rebbe would be nice to us, give us blessings and brachas. The bigger a Chassid we were, which meant to say, the more we shifted away from seeing the Rebbe as somebody who can give us blessings, and shifted towards the understanding that the greatest reward we can have for having a relationship with the Rebbe is the relationship itself. The Rebbe's relationship with Hasidim changed. We're living in the modern Lubavitch, the Lubavitch of America, with all of its challenges, and they're considerable. What lies at the heart of the mind of a Lubavitcher Chassid today? It's one word, and that word is shlichus. Shlichut. To travel to a place where there are no Jews and bring Torah and Yiddishkeit there. And it's the wish of every young yeshiva boy and every young yeshiva girl to get married and have this chus to go on shlichus. In other words, the philosophy of Chabad has evolved in the modern world. How do you see demonstrated that the relationship between a chassid and a rebbe today, the relationship is not what I take, but what I give, is that people move away from their families, move away from their comforts, move to who knows where and who knows what. Because the greatest thing I can get from my rebbe is my ability to give. And this is an ideal. It's a standard which is true even now. A simple chassid has a simple relationship with the Rebbe. A deeper chassid has a deeper relationship. The greater we are a chassid, the deeper the Rebbe is. And the deeper the Rebbe is means the more honest the Rebbe is. And the honesty of the Rebbe hurts, but the honesty of the Rebbe raises us up. It puts us up in a completely different venue. It puts us on a whole nother plane. So, although what's written here is true, that the Alter Rebbe objects to the fact that people are asking him for counsel about material things, and he goes ahead and continues answering those things. And the Alter Rebbe says we shouldn't be displeased by God's hand, we should embrace it. But the Rebbe's connection to Hasidim has everything to do with Hasidim. A bigger Chassid has a bigger Rebbe, has a deeper Rebbe. A simpler Chassid has a simpler Rebbe. And it's really, if you study the Rebbe, you'll see this. The relationship the Rebbe has with his Hasidim has everything to do with his Hasidim's relationship with him. And that's something to contemplate. In other words, when people go to the Ohel, right? I went to the Ohel yesterday because it was my birthday, my big day. I spent hours by the Ohel. What do you go for? People go for blessings. People go when they have hardships. But as we grow in Hasidus, we learn that the reason to go to the Ohel is to connect. And what it means to connect is to be able, as we say in the Lubavitch culture, to give the Rebbe Nachas Ruach, to do for him what he feels needs to be done to make this world a better place. That's the greatest thing we can get, is by giving.